Good morning, still, for 10 more minutes. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started with our generosity assessment. I know that our live stream is going, and so I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Dr. Janet Long, and I look forward to this. Thank you.
Thanks again, Pastor Stephen. So nice to be here. This is a different perspective for me, and I get to see one of the screens just like you get to see, and I have a handful of slides, a dozen or so, that I'd like to go through with you, and following that, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. However, if something that's on the screen doesn't make sense, or you have a burning question about one thing in particular, please interrupt. So that's the ground rule. Feel free to interrupt the preacher, because right now she's in her role as a consultant. So that's why I changed out of the robe, put on the logo, so you know that this is our time, and I'd love to address questions as they occur to you, as well as at the end. So if we could start with the first slide, please. And everybody waits, and we have a little drum roll. That's not the first. There we go. So I wanted you to see some scriptures that relate to stewardship so that you would know that I'm not just making this stuff up. It comes from Jesus, for the most part. About 60% of what Jesus said has a connection to money, material goods, possessions, stuff. Can you imagine that? He talks about all of that 60% of the time. The only thing that he talks more about is the realm of God. And often he links the two, because our relationships really do get caught up in money and material goods. We know the stories. We've lived the stories where there have been arguments and fractured relationships over fights or disagreements or disputes about resources. So I just wanted you to see that Jesus does speak about it with frequency, and I think that if it's that important, we should pay attention. So I'm at a disadvantage because that screen's a really long way away, and this one's at an angle. But you already heard the first one in the sermon this morning. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So you've had a little thought about that. Also, Jesus gives a few warnings about money, about how it can be destructive in our relationship with God, and how we pay a price in a lesser faith than we could have if we're stingy towards God. And so I included, so it is with those who store up. Oh my goodness, that's such an angle. Well, now there's a smart woman. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. So it sounds like we're maybe allowed to have some nice things. It's in the storing up that we get into trouble, where we think it's never enough and we want more. You know, the bigger barns in Scripture have become the bigger closets for us, or the bigger garages for us, or the bigger homes, or the bigger RVs, the bigger boats. you know what I'm talking about, right? Bigger jewelry boxes, bigger collections. The key, I think, is to see the second phrase, but are not rich towards God. When we put ourselves perpetually first, it shrinks our relationship, our connection with God. It's less than it could be when we give less than we could give. And then, to whom much is given, much will be required. That's a really good motto to live by, to think about, to ponder, because we have a lot. And if we don't think we have a lot, it's because we're comparing ourselves with those who have more and not those who have less. And almost everybody in the world has less than we do. No matter our respective station in life, by the world's standards, we haven't made. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Again, I'm going to do this. Like was suggested by my new friend here. So I want to encourage you to develop stewardship as a spiritual discipline. This is not your dues to the church. This is not a way of just doing your part. This is way more than that. Developing stewardship as a spiritual discipline makes it part of your faith journey, part of your walk with the Lord. And so, I encourage you to make your giving a priority. Make it relevant to your resources. Like, you know what you have it connect. Thanks. Wow. Blessings abound. To whom much is given, much is required. Okay. Thank you, thank you. It's always the tech, isn't it? So all this tech shows that we really do have resources. And we want our giving to be relevant to those resources. We want it to be reflective of faith, relative to what you value, responsive to the needs of the world, representative of your gratitude, because that's where generosity begins, is with a grateful heart. It also calls us to remember our baptism, and many of you were baptized without your knowledge or consent, but you later confirmed it, and you've probably heard a story or two about it. Maybe there are pictures. Maybe you cried. Maybe you cooed. But you were there. And that water symbolizes your entry and affirmation of being part of God's family. And you know, families work best when everybody gives their best. So I want to encourage you at this point, wherever you are on your faith journey, to reclaim your commitment and strengthen your covenant with the Lord. And now to the next slide, please. So consider the invitation to give. It comes not from the financial team of this congregation, its leadership, its pastor. The invitation to give comes from God, and it reflects God's trust in you. Now, God is trusting you to take this church and move it forward. Move it out into the community. Move it out to make a difference in the world. I already mentioned that when you consider your giving, you want to reflect on God's generosity to you. And can you think of anything good in your life that is not a blessing from God? Make lists of those blessings. Keep reflecting on God's gifts and referring to the blessings for which you are so grateful. There's also God's grace for you. We experienced it just moments ago when we came forward and had communion, a reminder of that grace and love. There's God's abundance in creation. When people think that there's just not enough, I turn to nature and say, do you think that the Creator decided that one kind of tree would be enough? Do you think the Creator decided one kind of animal would be enough? Do you think the Creator decided that one kind of flower would be enough? Do you think the Creator thought that every night the sun should look the same when it sets, or every morning the sunrise should be identical? Do you think the Creator thought that we should have the same season all the time? Even the same bodies all the time? There's such a variety of people. My dad used to keep a mug collection, coffee mugs, and no two were allowed to be alike. If somebody ever gave him a duplicate, he just immediately gave it away, because he wanted to open that cupboard door every morning and have a remembrance that all people are different. Everyone's unique. And so he would take a mug to the table, symbolizing that everybody has something to bring to the table. There's such an abundance. We need to stop being afraid that this is it and there's no more to follow. There's always more. More love and grace and gifts from a generous God. So your invitation to give and your response to that invitation allows God's Spirit to be at work in you. And so it becomes not a mathematical equation as much as it becomes one of mission and ministry. One where you reflect on what part you want to have in reaching out, in doing something beyond yourself, something that will live forever. Because any way that we invest in God is eternal. God has a hope for each of us and all of us, that we would be responsive and responsible for what we hold in trust. Everything we have, everything we are, all the possibilities and potential. And God's will for us is that we take care of one another and love each other. Next slide, please. When you recognize the blessing of giving, it's because you know your giving reaches beyond yourself. Your giving makes a difference. Your giving deepens your life of faith. and you realize the joy of giving because it represents your desire to love more fully, to reflect God's generosity more broadly. And your giving may provoke others to good deeds, which is what Scripture calls us to do. Like, we're to kind of poke each other a little bit and say, I'm going to do this, will you join me? And I've seen miracles occur when there's that little prodding going on. Next, please. So you probably recall that you had an opportunity here at Olmsted Community Church to fill out a survey. And it had 2 really simple questions, and many of you responded, and here are the top vote getters. These are your responses that we heard most frequently. So because gratitude leads to generosity, here is what you are thankful for about Olmsted Community Church. You are grateful for the community, the fellowship, and the caring that you experience here. That makes it sound like church family, that you are bonded to one another, that you enjoy being together, and that you care about each other deeply. That was evident in our prayers this morning. And I saw it in the way you greeted one another and the way you embraced the children. You're grateful for Pastor Stephen. I think you should be. He's a really strong leader and brings a lot of gifts. Not only are you grateful for Pastor Stephen, but you're grateful for his sermons. Not very many churches get sermons on their list, because we poll every church we consult with. You got sermons, which this preacher just loves to hear. You also are grateful for your worship. And Josh and Katie, hope I have those names right, they bring a beautiful dimension, and they brought out such glorious music from the choir. No wonder you're grateful for that. It lifts the heart and spirit. You're grateful for your outreach ministry, which I understand is robust. And we heard about it in terms of a word from the director of the CIA. So that was helpful. That was right on. You also are grateful for this facility. And I'd say a word about the facility. There are people who think that churches shouldn't have beautiful facilities because the money could be directed elsewhere if it weren't spent on a building. And I have 2 thoughts about that. One is that if banks are going to build big, gorgeous buildings to the glory of money, shouldn't we build some structures to the glory of God? Even if people aren't in this building, it can send a really heartfelt and hopeful message. The church I served for a third of a century in Elyria found itself in a changing neighborhood, and we became surrounded by a lot of Section 8 housing. And the people who lived there had struggles. They had emotional struggles, they had some physical problems, and they certainly had a lot of financial woes. And even though many of them didn't come inside the building with any frequency, they were happy to participate in the community gardens that we offered. And when I would see them out somewhere, they would introduce me to their friends and family as their pastor. What really touched me was when several of them told me in different conversations that when they were awake in the night because they couldn't rest, because they were up worrying about a wayward kid, about how to pay the bills, about an ailing family member, about where they would be able to find work, how they'd put food on the table. Said that they would look out the window at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and they would see the lights on the spire next door or across the street, and they would say, "It reminded me to look up and have hope because God will take care of me." And there are faithful people in that place that will pray for me and help me. So don't underestimate the power of a sacred building. What goes on here is holy, and what goes forth from here is also holy. And people love your technology. It's there. The YouTube service made the gratitude list. So you do say it's a blessing and you're thankful for it. And I'm sure that all the people who are at home, like in their recliners, in their really lovely afternoon garb, getting ready to watch a Browns game, they're grateful. They're grateful to be able to stay attached if health or other circumstances prevent them from being here in person. And don't forget that people all over, not just all over this area, but all over Ohio, all over the US, and all over the world can be part of this community because you have a YouTube channel. Okay, next please. So the other question we asked was, how do you value the ways that Olmsted Community Church uses money? And your number one answer was mission. Your second was facility. So there are a lot of fans of the holy space. Staff, worship, music, and online technology. So you want to direct money to those blessings that you identified in what you're thankful for. So it sounds like that's a pretty good balance, and I commend you for it. And next, please. So here's where we get to the actual assessment of the generosity and giving of this congregation. This church has 223 participating households in the congregation. Of those 223, 140 are known to give. So that represents just under 63% of your households being part of the giving to the church. Now back to the 140 giving units, 57 made pledges, which is about 41% of the giving households. If you look at the bigger picture of all the participating households, 25.6% made pledges. We'll go to the next slide and talk a little more about this. Talk about why pledging matters. It matters because those who make written commitments give more. They give more generously and they give more regularly. Both important. The process of determining what to pledge provides an opportunity to assess one's financial priorities. If you write it on the card, you have to have given it some thought. Now, my husband and I have an annual tradition every November where we go out for breakfast. We call it our stewardship breakfast. We've been doing this for a really long time, way before I had anything to do with the Center for Faith and Giving. In fact, before the Center for Faith and Giving even existed. But we go and we act like we're a small family foundation. And we have spreadsheets and calculators. I know those are kind of outdated, but now they're on our phones. And we figure out what our giving will be for the coming year. The causes that are nearest and dearest to our hearts, what we imagine that we will receive in income, and that's fairly predictable. And then how we want to give as much away as we can see our way clear to do. And so we pray about this opportunity, and then we sit there for a couple of hours and figure out how the distribution will take place. And it makes us think. It makes us think about what we do for ourselves, spend on ourselves, what we're able to do for others in our family, but especially what we can do for the world. Virtually all that money is directed through the church or church-related causes. Because one thing's for sure, the church is really careful with the gifts it receives. And you can get an accounting of every penny the church receives. Not where it came from, because we honor individual givers' anonymity if they choose to be anonymous. But you can get a report on how much the church takes in and then how it's spent. But assessing one's own financial priorities is a really important part of discipleship. And you ask the question, does my giving reflect my values? You may not ask it directly, but when you think about your giving, you are asking it at least indirectly. That's another reason that pledging really matters. It becomes not just an accidental or incidental gift, it becomes something that you plan and something that you promise. Your congregation's mission statement becomes very real at this point, because you claim we are a family centered on Christ, committed to nurturing loving relationships, faithful stewards, and dynamic faiths, showing God's love for all. I put that faithful stewards in bold. Not many congregations can say they have that in their mission statement, but you do. You have a lot to live up to. But what a great impetus for generosity. Okay, next, please. So here's a little chart. Some of you like charts, and here you go with a concentration of giving. You can see that each of the green blocks is even, 50% on the left and 50% on the right. That reflects money. The blue reflects the percentage of donors. So you'll see that not very many givers are giving 50% of the total. So not very many are giving a lot. And then the other side is that a whole lot are giving that same 50%. The next slide will say a little more about it. That previous chart demonstrates that 12% of the giving units in this congregation are doing 50% of the giving, and 88% of the givers are doing 50% of the giving. The questions worth asking and answering around that data are these. How are stories of generosity being shared? Because it would be really good to hear from the 12% who might provoke some other people to good deeds. How are those stories surfacing and then being shared? How does this congregation encourage the spiritual discipline and practice of stewardship? We had a moment before the offering today that helped us in that direction. It's really important that you be intentional about this development and encouragement. And we're back to the question, how do you provoke one another to good deeds? How are you doing that? Okay, next, please. So here's another chart that shows age differences. And as you would expect, those who are between birth and 39 are more numerous in people than in dollars. The 40-somethings are starting to bring that to a more level place. Your 50-year-old cohort, all those in their 50s, you are to be commended. This is a really unusual number. This distribution is generous on your part, because the number of people are giving about twice what might be expected in gifts. 60-year-olds surprised me a little bit the other way, because it's often the 60-year-olds who are out of balance because the green is so much higher, and here it's not quite there. The same is true of the 70s, people in their 70s, and then people in their 80s are inching up a bit, and people who are between 90 and 100, they're reflecting their willingness to continue sharing, even at such an age as 90 to 100. So the question that needs to be raised about a chart like this, because you can see that even if the green and blues aren't at the same level along the chart, the greens from the 50s over through the 80s are the highest bars on the graph. So we need to ask, how are you building a farm team, if you want to use a baseball analogy? But how are you building up younger people to back up your most generous donors with a new generation of givers? How are you developing the people who will one day be in the middle of this chart. For your reference, the average age of givers in this congregation is 68 years old. The average lifespan in this country is 78.9. So you need to think, okay, what are we going to look like in 10 years? What are we going to look like in 20 years? Those are important questions as you look to the long-term future. And you can do something about what might be rattling around in your head as a bad scenario. It can turn out well if you do some of the planning and prodding in advance. And next, please. Your stewardship journey begins with the desire to grow in your love of God and neighbor. Your stewardship journey grows with the commitment to act on that desire in demonstrable ways. Your stewardship journey matures in the recognition that what you give is more important than what you have. And your stewardship journey becomes a blessing to you and your household and to all who will be touched by your generosity. When we open our hands and our hearts to others, the people who are closest to us also feel the love. And finally, your generosity honors the God from whom all blessings flow. Your generosity reflects your faith. Your generosity makes a difference in the world. Your generosity is a sign of the Spirit, for the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Jesus invites us to strive first for the kingdom of God and its righteousness. That's Jesus' call on our lives. Strive first for God's realm, and everything else will fall into place. Now, there are roving microphone holders who are going to come to you if you raise your hand, indicating that you have a question or comment. Are there any questions or comments? Thank you. Up front, the word was awesome. Were you surprised by anything? I hope you were inspired by something. Here comes a mic.
We were surprised by anything. I think you hit it home with that whole issue of the average age of our donors. And we know that we are an aging church. Pastor's done a great job of bringing new families in. But when you look at what does that mean for us in the next 10 or 20 years if we don't continue to grow and attract younger members who can help sustain the church, while at the same time saying, we're not looking for members just for their donations. We're looking for the members to increase our faithfulness.
That's a really good reminder to everyone that nobody is ever won over to being part of a faith community with by having received the invitation, please come and help us pay our bills. What brings people is, please come and see what means the world to me. Please come with me. Please come and share and be part of this church family. And once they're here, it's really important for them to have opportunities to learn about stewardship and generosity as a way of life and as a touchstone of discipleship. Jesus said it 60% of the time. 60% of what he said has to do with this very topic. So we can't leave it out. We can't gloss over it. We can't just expect it's going to happen. There has to be intent. Okay, I saw another hand. You better drum up some business up here in front, huh?
Thank you. I am Vijay. I too had the same question that Barbara had about the age gap and the younger generation proportionately giving, relatively less compared to the older generation. Just wanted to share one of the things that I have observed during my work among many of the mainline churches. I'm not talking about the mega churches and so on. The mainline churches, especially one of the things that I have observed that inspires and motivates relatively younger generation is the difference that the congregation makes in terms of mission in the life of others, maybe closer or in other parts of the world. When they see it, hear it, and see evidence, just they get inspired. The point is that the mission engagement of the congregation is very crucial to inspire and motivate this age group. All age groups, of course, especially, the younger generation with all the media and the information available about the living conditions and issues in other parts of the world, and they want to do something. And when they see that their faith community is making a difference, then they find meaning in their faith, and naturally their giving increases. So just wanted to point out that the mission, how much we do as a congregation in terms of mission and what kind of difference it makes in the lives of others, and especially in other parts of the world, and how we are able to effectively communicate that to the congregation and members, that makes a difference.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that one thing that we need to do when younger folks pay a visit to a congregation is ask them if they would like to participate in one of your mission activities. There's nothing like hands-on, seeing what is being done, and then asking for the financial support to continue the work. But yes, mission is at the heart of all of this. Mission and ministry. We got races going on. There's another one up front.
Hello, my name is Bill. I just wanted to see Scott run. Thank you.
Thank you for that little entertainment break.
No, I'm not sure if I can get my thought across, but there was like 229 families, but 146 giving units. Probably have the numbers not quite right.
Yeah,
So
it's
there were-
223 and 140.
Okay. So I'm not sure if those people are just families that have not pledged, or are those families that aren't giving any money?
Not giving anything.
Okay. And yet they say they're members. So then my question is, are they, what age group do those that don't give fall in? Are they representative of all age groups, or are they all younger? Are they all older?
As far as I can tell, they span the generations.
Okay. And I'm not sure how you get across to them that you don't have ownership in anything that you don't actually buy. So you don't really feel a part of it. However, if you are investing in your belief and your church, then you started to feel an ownership. I don't want to use the word ownership so much, but ownership in, yeah, I should help, I should be a part of this church, I should be on different committees and such. But I'm not going to do that if I'm not giving any money, because I don't feel part of it. That's what I'm thinking.
I think that inviting people to invest is really important. And starting at any level is significant.
But we're not supposed to know who those people are, right? They're anonymous.
Well, they're anonymous to a point. They're not anonymous to everyone. So you could, because that information is entrusted to a few people, those few people could send communication to that particular group, inviting them to participate in the financial life of the congregation. And I think that there are lots of ways that you can do it that are very caring and careful, because you sure don't want to turn people off. And I know that sometimes in my zeal, I've offended people by because they internalized it as guilt, when I was hoping that they were hearing opportunity and invitation. So I think we have to be hypersensitive, because there's some reason that they haven't connected in a way that is causing them to put money in the plate. Now, the one thing we don't know about is, are some of those people just putting some loose offerings in? Because there are loose offerings every Sunday that aren't attributable to anyone. But that is casual giving. That is, because they had a little extra, or because they were extra touched by something that happened that day, or they wanted to be part of some effort. But if you want people to be intentional, then you have to be intentional with the communication and with the way that the invitation is extended. And that's why I call it an invitation. We do have expectations of one another, but the invitation to give is just that. It's an invitation to realign your values to include the value of church, the value of the mission and ministry, and the value you place on being rich toward God. And we all need to be reminded that that's Jesus' call on us, to be rich toward God. I think I got into a sermon. Okay, we got a question here and then one here, or a comment.
I'm Jenny Moore. As someone who's lived in the Olmsted communities my entire life, I've seen it grow and change and grow and grow and grow, and that's not stopping. There's still houses building and people moving in. people live here for a reason because we have a lot to offer with schools and community and history. There's a lot of churches around too. Something that I've often wondered, and I wonder if you have found this too, since you work with a lot of different churches, are churches that offer more than one service, do they bring in more people for more opportunities to come in and worship in person?
It seems that the key right now is offering both an in-person opportunity and an online opportunity. Where I'm seeing some churches try to venture out is with a weekday evening and a shortened version of a service. No more than like 35 or 40 minutes. It's more of a Vespers kind of service. And some congregations are reconnecting with some of their folks that way, but I haven't seen where having more worship opportunities is bringing in a lot more new people. There is, as you know, our culture has changed pretty substantially over the last couple of decades, and the most quickly rising group when it comes to surveys regarding religion is those who profess to have none. They're not saying that they align with any faith-based group.
One follow-up to my other thing is, if you ever drive around this downtown area around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock on a Saturday, it's full of people coming and going from the 5 o'clock service from St. Mary's, and we're a very Catholic-heavy community. So that was just something that always made me wonder, do we need to be doing that too? And then the other follow-up question to what you just said is, what's the solution to that?
Well, I think, let me say just one quick word about the crowds at Mass. They have something that we mainline Protestants don't have, which is an obligation. I mean, they get that drilled into them. If they're going to be faithful Catholics, if they're going to practice the Catholic faith, they have an obligation to go to Mass every week. And people really do feel that obligation, and they do a lot to try to be there. And so having lots of different options is part of making that possible for folks. We tend to be pretty free-spirited and give people all kinds of options regarding whether or not they're here in person on a given Sunday. We're pretty gracious about lagging attendance, and we don't stipulate that we have an expectation. I think the very best way for a church like this one, the one that we're members of, most mainline churches, the very best way to help grow a church is to invite your personal circle of close friends and family members. I mean, you can think right off the top of your head of 5, 10, a dozen people who you spend time with who are nowhere this morning. They're home. What?
To St. Mary's,
or they all go to St. Mary's because they have to.
Yeah.
They have to.
Well, so I'm just wondering, in your research, is there a direct correlation between church attendance and givers and churches? Is there such a thing as a church that does not have a financial dilemma?
Well, every church has its challenges, and many of them are financial. But one thing that I think you'll want to explore, it's been mentioned that this is an aging congregation, and yet the number of children who were up here this morning belies that. That was, I mean, most congregations would be delighted to have, 10 or 12 kids, a couple babies. I mean, that's remarkable right now. Not the norm. But one of the things that I think you have an opportunity to explore with more depth and breadth is a legacy giving opportunity for people to remember Olmsted Community Church in their estate plans. Whether it's an insurance policy with the church's beneficiary, or it's a part of a person's estate or a couple's estate where they decide they're going to tithe their estate as a testament. It is a last will and testament. So as a testament to their faith and their conviction about the importance of this church and its significance for them, they'll leave 10% of their estate to the church. Or they'll say, I think of that church as my church family. That congregation is my church family, so I'm going to treat them like a member of the family. So I got 3 kids, I'm going to make the church my 4th child. And then instead of a tithe, they give a child's portion. And that's when a child's portion is bigger than most adult portions, because it turns out to be, a third or a half or a quarter, or depending on the number of children. That can be very meaningful, and that is so meaningful to the congregation, and I think is to be celebrated. All the people who thought enough of this congregation to leave a legacy gift in perpetuity mean that they believe in you to carry forward with the mission and ministry. They believe in you, and you are standing on their shoulders forever in their debt, forever in their good graces, because they're like my friend Betty, who just, nearing death said, don't worry about me, and just know that I'll be cheering you on from heaven. And that's what it means when legacy gifts are put in place. That not even death can separate us from one another and the love we know in Christ Jesus our Lord. And they live on. And we need to lift their names. We need to remember their stories. And that is one way that this congregation can have more financial strength, but not just for the sake of having no financial problems, but for the sake of encouraging others and provoking others to good deeds, so that mission and ministry can be multiplied. Did you have something else, Jenny? Okay.
I'm Jean Dunbar, and I was just wondering, didn't we used to have envelopes? Families would receive envelopes for the year? I'm a former Catholic, maybe it's a Catholic church that does this. But if we were given a box of envelopes for every week, wouldn't we be possibly giving more?
Possibly, but not likely, because people don't do it that way for the most part. It would probably be helpful to some in the congregation to have those envelopes, and it might be possible to have them made available to people who request them, but most people now want to give money without having to write a check or put cash in an envelope. They want to do it like we heard this morning through the ACH, which is, you just have it set up with the bank. It's an every week or every month. It's an automatic bill pay, and I don't like to think of it as bill pay, but it certainly is a way to be regular and consistent in your giving without the worry of, I left the envelope at home, or I ran out of checks, or I meant to bring my checkbook with me and didn't. And the options too for credit cards and other kinds of payments, that that's something that younger people want to know. They want those QR codes, and they want to be able to respond instantly. If something touches them, they want to give right now. Otherwise, if they don't do it now, it'll slip their mind when they get onto other things. So, you know, I remember getting my first set of envelopes when I was a girl. And the first envelope was for an initial offering, which I think was meant to pay for the envelopes themselves. But I was insistent that I put something in every one of those envelopes. And I've had parishioners who've had that same, that had that same sense of obligation that every envelope should be filled. And so it's really remarkable when somebody has been away from church for 10 weeks, and when they come back, they bring 10 envelopes. That's just like now beyond my comprehension, but it does matter to some people, and I think Stephen's up there making a note about how that matters to some people and how they can be made available, but not on a wholesale scale. It'll just be a waste of trees and money to provide them to everyone, because some of us give an annual gift and say how we want it to be used, like most of it for the general fund, and some for special offerings that we know are coming, some for special causes the church supports. But I used to be an every month giver, and now Deanna and I are annual givers. It's not like we cut back, it's just that we do it differently than we used to. And that varies too with age, because you can give your mandatory distribution from a qualified retirement account. You can have it come straight to the church. There's so many more creative ways to give than there used to be. And stocks and retirement funds and things in perpetuity. There's no shortage of ways to give. And envelopes could be one. Anything else? Well, thank you for your kind comments and your probing questions, and for your very attentive presence. Thank you very, very much. Some of you again in just a short time.
If you serve on Executive Council, Finance Committee, or Memorials and Endowments Committee, you can head right upstairs to the Fellowship Hall where lunch is waiting. And
thanks, Jenny.
We'll have a quick blessing up there and get started up there as well.